So now that we know those tools, the next thing we want to work on is some of the restoration tools. So in this case, I have probably you'll have the patch tool or the healing brush tool up. Okay. In any case, it's typically under the eyedropper tool, a couple underneath the uh, crop tool. But once again, if you rest your cursor on it, you'll get the tooltip. Anytime you see this triangle in the bottom right corner of a tool, it means that there are hidden tools behind it. And to access those tools, you just need to click and hold with your left click, and then you can pick a different one. So if I needed to switch to the healing brush tool or back to the patch tool, we can do those. And today we'll cover the patch tool, the healing brush tool, and the red eye tool. We'll use each one of those and show you how it works. Okay, so to start out, we're going to select the patch tool. Got the patch tool, and it's fairly simple. We basically just create a selection by left clicking and dragging around, in this case this little spot here. Once we've let go of the mouse, we get what is called a selection, or the marching ants lines, and we know that this inside there selected. You can see the cursor changes as I go inside that selection. Once I have the selection there, I've basically selected the area I need to fix. I go ahead and drag that off, and the content aware will match that really well. And that works really well in areas where it's the same color, the same value, the same texture. Those work really well. So you can see that I can come in and take these out. I can use the spacebar to navigate around and just start removing. Now if I don't like that, I can click away to deselect it. So say I do it really big, you don't want to do that. You just click outside of it to deselect it to start again. Okay, and really you don't want to work in too big of an area. That's where the ability to zoom in, I'm using the shortcut there, the command plus or control plus if you're on Windows, and I can see all these spots, come around and take them out. Okay, and you can even see that it's going to work on hair and skin as well. So we'll move those around to where we want them. This might be a little bit tricky. See where it's in my mom's eyebrow. If I click in there, you got to kind of match the same value and contrast. And sometimes that works. Sometimes when you've got varying areas of contrast, it doesn't work as well. So a little bit of patience. This does take a little bit of time. It's a little bit more time consuming, but these tools have been added into Photoshop in the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 versions. Make it really nice and make photo restoration quite a bit easier than what it used to be. So it used to be that we would start out teaching a lot of other things in Photoshop before we would show you photo restoration. But now with the patch tool and the healing brush tool, it's almost a good way to start and get right into Photoshop and start using it. Helps you understand selecting and manipulating these pixels right off the bat. So you can see that works really well. That's the patch tool. Okay, and that's going to cover most of what you need to do. Now let's take a look at the other tool. I'm going to click to deselect that selection there. Let's take a look at the healing brush tool. Healing brush tool is a little bit different. Now up here I've got options. Depending on what your interface looks like, your options may move around. I think in the newest version the options bar is more on the side as opposed to on top, so just be aware of that. In here we can come in and change our brush size, the spacing and the hardness. Usually you want the hardness up so you have a softer brush, so it blends on the outside of where it's going. Now the healing brush works a little bit different in that you have to set a sample area. So if I just click and start here, it's going to give me this area. You need to option click to define a source point to be used to repair the image. Now in this case it's option click. If I were on a Windows computer it would be an alt click. So just remember the differences there. But if I hold the option, I want to sample a nice clean area, say right there. And now I can come kind of paint over these blemishes. Now one problem with that is that it is always sampling from that same source. So if I want to change that, there's a way I can change an aligned, and so those are always aligned. Let me show you the difference here. So if I check aligned, and I can always reset that source. So if I hold Option again, that's where I'm going to source from, and I clicked once, then I can come back and start painting. And notice you can see that plus from where I'm sourcing that material from. Okay? And that's what it means to be aligned. It stays with it. So it's always going to be to the upper right until I reset it again. So that's a problem if I come over here. See, it's sampling from somewhere over there. So I may want to reset that sampling area again by Option clipping or Alt clicking to set the sampled area. So that's the main difference between the healing brush, is you've got to constantly be resetting where you're sampling from, as opposed to the patch tool, you drag to the sampled area you want. So difference of preference. Some people like this better if you've got a stylus or a tablet. Now this is a little bit tricky right here. I can Option click and sample part of that line in the brick there and match that up. If I were to sample, say, from below and do that, it doesn't work as well. Okay? And if I make a really big mistake, there's always edit and undo. So I can go back and undo each step of that process. You do have a limitation on how many undos you can do, so just be aware of that. In this case right here, when I want to get fine up, I'm going to shrink that brush down, and now I can get inside these lays and fix some of these blemishes in here. Okay? So the idea of us scanning in at a higher resolution is that we can zoom up really close on these details, and if we don't do a really good job of covering some of these mistakes, you can see that there's a mistake right there didn't really cover up. The idea is that when we scan in extra resolution and we go to print, a lot of that's hidden because we're zooming up so close and working on such a fine detail level. It's an advantage for us to be that high. Now you can see that one didn't work so well, so maybe that would be better off for the patch tool. Okay, and you can see the areas of contrast may not always work out just perfect. Okay, you can kind of see some defined lines in there. And you want to kind of rotate your sample area where you're picking things from. So those are the two main tools. You know, the other tool that we can use in here is the red eye tool. Okay, so if I click and hold on these restoration tools, you can see I've got the red eye tool down at the bottom. And the way that this works is I can just drag a marquee or a rectangle around that red eye, and it should work. Let me make sure I've got it deselected. So down here I've got that selection. So select, deselect. Okay. If something's selected, you can only work in there. That's not going to work proper. I probably should have gone in with the patch tool and clicked one more time. So what has happened is I had that area right there, didn't deselect it. Now that it's deselected, the red eye tool should work. So let's try it again. Okay, and you notice it changed it to black. Okay, so that's a little bit dramatic. My preference, and I just hit Command Z, or if you're on Windows, you can hit Control Z to undo that. Okay, that's a little bit harsh for me, so I'm not a big fan of the red eye tool. So another tool you can use, and usually this is hidden under the dodge tool. So if you come down to the dodge tool, you'll see you've got dodge, burn, or a sponge tool. And the sponge tool will basically let us desaturate that. Now I can change this brush size here as well. I can make it bigger. Hardness is at 0, so it's a really soft brush. It's blurred out on the edges. So when I come in, I can desaturate that. Now, let me show you the flow. You can also change. I usually leave that at 50%. And then you've got the option to desaturate or saturate. I never really use saturate, usually just do desaturate. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to click and do a drag, and you can see before and after. That's Command Z or Control Z kind of toggling back and forth. Okay. And I actually think I'm going to go with a smaller brush. Okay, and I let go, click and do it a little bit more and let go. Okay. Basically graying out and desaturating that eye, taking that red color out and making it more of a grayscale. And that's a little bit of a softer approach than the red eye tool. So I like that one a little bit better than the red eye tool itself. And there are other more advanced ways to fix red eye, but that's pretty much the easiest, quickest way to do it. So if I zoom out, doing the Command 0, you can tell it's not as noticeable. The red eye tool, it's almost too dark. So you've got to be aware of that as well.